is making poor people poorer. We're going to look at something like 3 million people by the end of the process, so the end of the 5 years, will be worse off than when we started. Hundreds of thousands of children will be in poverty as a result of these changes. So I didn't come into politics to make that happen. I came into politics to make people's lives better. And most MPs would say exactly that. You know, irrespective of what party you belong to, you would say, yeah, I'm a public servant, I'm trying to do good. But these proposals as they stand at the moment are going in the wrong direction completely.
Neil Duncan-Jordan, first Labour MP for Poole. How was the election?
Gruelling, actually. I only got selected a few weeks before the election was called, so I didn't, unlike some of these candidates, I didn't have a long run-in to the election. So I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks that I knew I was the candidate, and then the election was called, so it was all very quick. And then on the doorstep during the campaigning, I knew something was changing. You could just tell when you knock on doors that usually tell you to go away, and they're inviting you in and saying, yeah, I'm going to vote for you, I'm going to give you a chance this time, because I've always voted Conservative, but actually I'm not impressed with what they've done, so I'm going to give somebody else a chance, and you're the only other likely winner, so I'm going to back you. And you could tell that that was changing.
What sort of thing was coming up on the doorstep at the time? Was it the economy?
Yeah, cost of living, the Liz Truss economic debacle, all of that was coming up. But actually the most important thing was that they'd had an MP for 27 years who was invisible. Right. So that really made a difference. I was the one knocking on the doors. I was the only candidate knocking on the doors. I said I would make myself available if I were to be elected, which I've done. They could see that change. So it was a bit like having somebody who will go out to bat for you, or the same old stuff where you don't get anything done. And it was that sort of, yeah, we want somebody who's vocal, we want somebody who's going to speak up for the town, I'll give you a chance. It was that more than probably anything.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think it's the sort of Westminster groupthink would have you believe that actually people don't vote for their constituency MP anymore, that actually it's a more presidential-esque race, that it was between really Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. But have you felt that then in the last year? Have you felt people are really coming to you as a constituency MP?
Yeah, absolutely. And the case in point is that people say to me, I don't like Keir Starmer or what Labour are doing, but I like what you're doing. When I see you speaking in Parliament, I agree with what you see, with what you say. I see you going to local schools. I see you going to local community events. I see you walking your dog along the beach. All of these things matter to people, that you're connected, that you're local, that you're like them. That's what makes the difference. So pretending that there's a Westminster bubble that you're part of and they're not, that's not going to win you any support, in my view, whatsoever. You've got to be connected. People have got to feel like when they vote for you, they could knock on your door and ask you to help them, and you'd say, yeah, come on in. And that's what I've tried to do. I don't think they've had that for many years, and that's why I was a bit of a breath of fresh air, I think, for the constituency.
I've just finished a book on Tony Benn, and this is sort of giving me all of the sort of Ben-esque line of thinking. Yeah,
community connections, engagement. I make it absolutely clear to my residents when I go around and meet them at functions, I'm not a politician. I work in politics. Because politicians have got a very negative persona. People view them as corrupt, lying, can't be trusted, all of that sort of stuff. That's not me. It's not the world I came from. I was a trade union official before coming into Westminster. I've represented people all my life. This is something I have done. It's just a different hat I'm wearing now. But I'm not a politician. I work in politics, and I'll try and advocate for those people when they come to see me. And that goes down extremely well. And also being honest with the public, saying, there are 70,000 electors in Poole. I can't possibly represent you all. How could I? On things like assisted dying, I have half of them telling me to vote yes, and I have half of them telling me to vote no. Whichever way I choose, half of them are going to be disappointed. So you have to be honest with the public and say, I'll represent you to the best of my abilities, but to think that one person can represent the views of 70,000 people, which are so diverse, we've got to have a more modern approach to our democracy. We've got to understand that, it's more complex, it's more nuanced than that. It's not black and white, I don't think.
Well, see, that's one of the most dividing issues, I think, that we've seen in quite some time. Well, actually, when I say quite some time, probably the last couple of months maybe, but assisted dying, because I don't know a single MP who's made up their mind, in a concrete fashion. And it's because all of their constituents are so divided. What do you do when you go in to vote? Do you look through your inbox? Are you swayed by it? Or do you say, I've got to make a judgment for myself here?
I mean, on any piece of legislation, whether it's assisted dying or anything else, you have to know what it is you're voting on. You have to be clued up on what it is the amendments say, what it is the bill says, what the nuances are. And then you make a judgment based on your values. I mean, that's what we all do every day. You choose to shop in a particular way because you don't buy something because you don't like that company, or you buy something else because you do like that company and what it produces. We all make those choices based on our values, where we go on holiday, what car we drive, what clothes we wear. All of those things are choices that people make. The public often say, I'm not interested in politics. They're in politics every day. Politics is part of what we live and breathe. Whether you realise it or not, whether you like it or not, it affects virtually every decision you'll ever make and everything that happens to your life. So we're all connected, and politicians and people who make the laws have to make sure that when they go in to vote on particular pieces of legislation, they understand how their values match up with what they're being asked to vote for. And if they don't, then you wouldn't support that particular piece of legislation.
And that's case in point. You've got a tricky one coming up, because you've got these potential welfare cuts that are going to go to a vote, we think, early June. What are your initial thoughts? Starmer's trying to find £4.3 billion in welfare cuts. Is that something you can agree with in principle?
No. I mean, let's take it from the start. Does the welfare system need reform because it's not ideal at the moment and it doesn't work? Yes. That's easy to say. Yeah. It doesn't work for the current recipients. It's far too low, a lot of benefits, and it's far too punitive, and it doesn't support them enough. So there's that issue that has to be addressed. Do we need to get people into work who can work? Yes, of course. It's great to have a job, to have more money than living on benefits, to have confidence, to have freedom to do what you want. Absolutely. But that needs support, and that costs money. So we have to look at how we can do that. What we don't do is we don't create those jobs for people or make them better off by taking their benefits away. That's not how it's going to work. So you can argue that you have to save money, and I think there's a dispute about that, to be honest. I mean, some of the figures show that we're not actually spending any more as a percentage of GDP on non-pension related social security than we were in 2008. So this idea that it's going up and up and up, the number of people claiming going up and up and up, but the amount we're spending is not. So this is a bit of a myth, and I'm doing more work in Parliament about how we bust some of those myths with MPs, because it's easy to be taken in by headlines. Oh, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. Actually, we need to dig in and get to the bottom of what some of these things are going to mean. And what it's really going to mean is making poor people poorer. We're going to look at something like 3 million people by the end of the process, so the end of the 5 years, will be worse off than when we started. Hundreds of thousands of children will be in poverty as a result of these changes. So I didn't come into politics to make that happen. I came into politics to make people's lives better. And most MPs would say exactly that. Irrespective of what party you belong to, you would say, yeah, I'm a public servant, I'm trying to do good. But these proposals as they stand at the moment are going in the wrong direction completely.
Well, speaking of headlines, there was a headline this morning from the Resolution Foundation, the think tank. They've estimated that, the numbers are rather punitive around this. So, we're looking at potentially 60,000 people will go back into work by cutting these PIP payments. Is that around the number you imagined it to be? Or did you think that perhaps more people would be, quote unquote, pushed back into work if they have their welfare payments taken away?
Well, it's interesting because the government argue at the moment that there are 200,000 people who are already ready to go back to work now but can't find employment. So we have to ask ourselves, where are the jobs for these people? who already want to go back in, let alone the 60,000 down the line that might be coerced into it. What about the 200,000 who currently are ready to go back to work? What disabled people are telling me is that A, there's not a lot of jobs around that are meaningful, but also B, employers are reluctant to take them on, particularly if they've had long periods of time out of the workforce. An employer will say, well, why should I take on somebody who hasn't worked for 10 years? I'm going to need an incentive to do that. I'm going to need a tax break or some sort of, grant or something. We have to invest in getting people back to work, and that means putting money in now, not further down the line. Under the proposals, we're cutting benefits in November 2026 and putting employment support in 2029. That's completely round the wrong way. We need to be investing now in that employment support.
I mean, the argument that Starmer and the Leader's Office would make is that they are increasing universal credit. That is going to go up just above inflation, although I do think that is around 1.7% increase. I mean, what do you think universal credit should be? Is that enough to live on?
No. And I mean, I made the point right at the beginning. Our benefit system needs reform because it doesn't deliver. It doesn't deliver in the sense that it doesn't cover the essentials that people need. That's why we need to look again at it, but we need to do that in conjunction with the very people who are using the system. So it's no good you and I looking at universal credit. We need disabled organisations to get round the table with government to redesign our benefit system so that it works for people with fluctuating conditions, works for people who will never be able to work at all, works for people who can work but only on a part-time basis. It needs to be more sophisticated than it is at the moment. It's not a great system. It needs to be improved and reformed, absolutely. But you don't do that by making people poorer.
But see, so you're talking about this from, I mean, looking at it at the coalface, right? Which is that people are living on a punitive amount of money each week. And you're saying that it's not enough money and you need to talk to disabled charities in order to get the correct amount, right? But on the other side of that, we've got this huge argument at the moment that young people are out of work because it's better to be on universal credit than it is to be in work, that it pays more to be on welfare. I mean, is that something that you see in your
constituency? Not particularly, no. I've heard lots of claims in the chamber about people online influencing young people to not go to work and to live on benefits for the rest of their life. In my constituency, I don't see that. I mean, others might, and I accept that they may have had examples of that. I don't see that. I think this is a bit of a sort of media story that's put around to undermine our welfare system. I'm a great believer in the welfare state. I think the welfare state is what makes us human and compassionate. It looks after those who can't look after themselves. We all pay in, and when we need to, we all draw out. We should all have a stake in it. I believe in universalism. I think we need to do more to improve that, not leave people to their own devices and let them rot. We absolutely, as a mark of a civilised society, need to show what a compassionate welfare system looks like. We don't have one now. It does give us a chance to try and do that, to try and reform it now into something much better.
And I suppose this sort of bleeds into the conversation that we could have about pensioners, because I know that you've been speaking a lot about them, particularly overseas pensioners today, those who aren't entitled to their full state pension. Where are you on the triple lock? Do you think that that should be maintained?
Yeah, of course. I mean, before I was a trade union official, I worked for the National Pensioners Convention for nearly 20 years. That was a trade union more or less for pensioners, and it was linked to the trade union movement. For years, we campaigned to have the link with earnings restored because it was Margaret Thatcher that took that away. And that meant for years, pensions never kept pace with the cost of living at all. And getting a link back to earnings or inflation or 2.5%, which is what the triple lock means, is really, really important, because you have to maintain income in retirement. You can't go out and get another job in retirement and increase your wages. You can't get promotion in retirement and increase your wages. Mm-hmm. You're on your pension, and every year you live, that pension declines if it's a sort of a pot of savings that you're living on. So the state pension is really, really important. And I would make this argument, particularly to your sort of viewers, it's important not just for my generation and the ones above me, but for your generation and the people that are coming up, like my kids who are younger. They're going to need a decent income in retirement. Most firms are not going to offer them a final salary pension scheme like in the 70s and 80s. They've gone, largely. Private pensions often don't deliver what people think they're going to. So the state pension is going to have to underpin our income in future generations for a very, very long time. So keeping its value and maintaining it through the triple lock is really, really important. And that isn't just for greedy pensioners. It's for me when I retire. It's for you when you retire, and so on. That's what intergenerational solidarity is all about. It's not one group getting it and another group not. It's about it being there for generations over time so that we all benefit. So the national insurance scheme, for example, I pay national insurance as a worker now to pay for the pensions of pensioners who are now retired. They paid national insurance when they were at work to pay for the pensioners who were before them. And the people who are at work in years to come will pay my pension when I retire. That's how national insurance works. It's a social contract between the generations. We should be celebrating that, not trying to undermine it or say old people are against young people or young people don't like old people. It's nonsense, absolute nonsense. When we gather round the Christmas table as a family, all the generations
Not
together.
me and you, just to be clear.
You'd be welcome at Duncan-Jordan Towers, of course. But when we gather as a family at the Christmas table, all generations, young people don't say, oh, I want Granny's bus pass to be taken away. This is nonsense. This is like a fake argument that's emerged over the years that groups are against each other. That's not how our society works. And we need to really debunk some of those arguments, I think.
Do you know, I've never heard the conversation about pensions. I'm actually a little bit speechless because you've just sort of changed my mind and my perception of all of it. I think because I spent a lot of time, especially around the TUC Congress last year, talking to young people who were frustrated with Sharon Graham, with Unite, who had taken on this line that actually we're going to fight for the winter fuel payments. And that was a big motion that was put to the delegates to vote on. And so many young people were furious with this. They said, why on earth are we talking about pensioners when they're not in the trade union movement, they're not workers? And you sort of just debunked that entire theory. And actually it sort of obliterated my next question, which was going to be about winter fuel and about whether young people should be paying for pensioners to keep their winter fuel allowance. But judging by that argument, you would say yes.
Yes. I mean, I'm paying for pensioners to keep their winter fuel allowance because it's part of our welfare state. It's part of our universal welfare state. What the government have done now is means test that. What has that meant in reality? 750,000 poor pensioners who used to get it because it was a universal payment now don't get it because you have to claim pension credit in order to get the winter fuel allowance. And because they haven't claimed pension credit, not only do they not get that, but they don't get the winter fuel allowance either. They used to, and they don't now. Now, they're the very poorest in our society, 750,000 pensioners living way below the poverty line. Now, if we paid that universally, they would have had that money. They could have put their heating on in the winter. But we've forced them not to. We've forced them, and I remember this when I worked for the MPC, people riding on the bus every day to keep warm, people going to the library to keep warm, people only living in one room at home to keep warm. This is uncivilised. In the 21st century, in a country with the 6th strongest economy in the world, we should be ashamed that that is happening. And what I say to young people, what I say to my kids as well, is that we've all got a stake in this. It works because we're all part of it. Don't let people divide us up. We've got to be on the same side. So yes, we have to defend Granny's winter fuel allowance because we're also going to argue, as they will, that we need decent, affordable housing for young people. It's not an either or. You know, the society we want to build is the society we want to build, not what somebody else tells us. So we have to go out and advocate for that.
I wonder if you'd ever thought about a universal winter fuel payment, because there are many. So I'm doing a little bit of whataboutery, and I don't mean to, but there are many young people who now, particularly students, who are perhaps not able to earn more than £18,000, who are also paying maybe £1,000 a month in rent, who can't afford to turn their heating on.
Yeah.
Would you ever advocate for something like that?
Absolutely. I mean, we've got to do something about the energy market. Absolutely. I mean, let's be frank about that. Privatisation didn't work for working people. And whilst the government is trying to do a lot to bring down bills through, more renewable energy, which I support, less fossil fuel based, not taking energy from Russia, having more energy security. Hopefully that will bring bills down. But at the end of the day, these are still private companies that own the energy. At the weekend, I was at a Surfers Against Sewage demo in Poole in the harbour. Wessex Water, which serves my area, is owned by one Malaysian family. Now, I don't have anything personally against that family. I don't know them. But I don't think it's right that one family should own the water company that serves my area. And when you argue with people about that and the fact that we need to have more of these utilities back in public ownership, they agree. It's a popular policy.
Because it's a commodity that doesn't change.
Absolutely. And it's needed. So fuel, you're always going to need fuel. Water, you're always going to need water. So these things are essentials. They're not luxuries in our society. We should have more control. And what I said at the demo on Saturday is you can't control what you don't own. And we need to seriously think about how we take back control in some of these key areas. Railways, of course, are starting, but the other industries, water, fuel and so on.
But what about Great British Energy? Because we are moving towards that, and that will be a nationalised project. Do you think that's going to work?
Yeah, it will. Well, I mean, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, of course. It will work if it brings down people's bills. It will work if it uses less fossil fuels and relies less on gas imported from Russia and other states. It will improve in that way, but these are going to be long-term goals, I think. We're not going to see tomorrow. You and I are not going to see our bills drop tomorrow. And I think that's one of the problems with these sort of big ticket items. They take a long lead-in time, and people want change now, and yet change might not come now. It might come in a few years' time. And that's one of the problems, I think, with our politics more generally and our democracy. It's so short-term.
Yeah.
And actually, some of these issues are massively long-term. The NHS is a long-term, getting down health inequalities, improving the health of the nation. These are cultural shifts, long-term projects, and governments come every 5 years potentially. So you just about start to see change, and then it all changes again because somebody else has come in. We don't really have a long-term sort of agreed plan on any of these things. And that's why things stop and start, and they never really reach fruition and so on. And one of the areas which I'm quite upset about that we haven't done more on is social care. Social care has been in a mess for decades in this country. We've had 20 commissions and reports over 20 years. They all say the same thing. They all say it doesn't work properly. There's too many private companies involved. The care can be quite poor in terms of standards and quality. People have to pay quite a lot for what they get, and the workers are badly treated.
Which is astonishing, right?
We know all this, right?
It's so expensive, and then you've got the people who actually work in the system.
On minimum wage.
Yeah.
So we know all this, and we've known all this for a very long time, okay? What happens? Labour come in and say, we're going to set up a commission to have a look at this. Well, I think we already know what that commission's going to say. I could write it now, what it's going to come up with, because all these other 20 commissions and reports all say exactly the same thing. This one isn't going to be any different. So what we've done is we've pushed it into the long grass. And these are issues that society as a whole need to get to grips with. We need to have a public, national debate about how we fix some of this stuff. Just like railways, just like energy, just like water. Social care is a massive issue. The health of the nation, how we look after people, young and old, when they can't look after themselves. These are really important issues which we're just passing along. So we need to be more, we need to be bolder about some of these things, really grasp the big issues. I think that we can take the public with us on some of these discussions if we can articulate what it is where we're trying to get to. You've got to be honest with the public. Yes, there might be costs involved. How are we going to do that? And we need to set that out. How long is it going to take? Yes, we'd have to set that out. But ignoring it doesn't do anybody any good.
But the state would have to pick up in a way that I think that most governments are frightened to admit, right? So the interim process, if you're talking about long-termism, you'd have to pay to take these companies out of private hands.
Yeah,
right?
So I've done a lot of work on this in the past. So you'd have to, it's like, how do you eat an elephant? A piece at a time. We'd have to do it in stages. You're not going to do it big bang on one day. One of the first things we could do is about domiciliary care. So people who go into your home to look after you when you need care at home. What we used to call in the 70s home helps, now we call domiciliary care workers. They're all private companies, largely. They've all got contracts with local government. Those contracts come up for renewal periodically. We could take those back into local authority control. We can do this. This is exactly what we're doing with the railways. When the railway contracts come up for renewal, they're going into GB railways, one at a time. They're not all going on the same day because the contracts are all at different times. So you spread the cost of all of that and so on. So we could start to take domiciliary care back into the public sector, improving workers' terms and conditions, having more control and say over the care that we can provide, and making sure that people don't get ripped off by having to pay for care which is substandard. We need to improve the way we do business in this country, the way we treat people. It's no good that Mrs. Smith has to go to bed at 6 o'clock at night because that's what the care company says the workers will do. They'll come round and put you to bed at 6. I don't want to go to bed at 6, she'll say. Well, I'm sorry, but I can't come back any later. Where's the compassion in all of this? Where's the humanity in all of this? We've lost so much over the course of the austerity years and beyond. We've got to try and regain some of that humanity back, I think.
Yeah, and I think this is sort of brings us round to the reason why I think we invited you here in the first place, which was to talk about the welfare cuts. Because it is a humanity issue, isn't it?
It's a moral crusade, definitely. I mean, I've heard Liz Kendall and others, Liz Kendall was the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, and others argue Labour has a moral crusade to get people back to work. Yeah, fine. I'm happy with that. But we also have a moral crusade to look after those who can't look after themselves, to care for those who can't care for themselves, and not to make people poorer in the process. So, yeah, there are lots of moral crusades. We all want to do the right thing, but as it stands, the Green Paper is pointing in the wrong direction, in my view.
Will you be able to vote for it?
In its current form, absolutely not. And I'm one of the 42 Labour MPs who signed the letter to The Guardian laying that out. I've made it clear I think the Green Paper needs to be paused. I think we need to stop, not have any votes on it at all. We need to bring in the disabled organisations to get them to redesign the benefit system so it's something more coherent and better and more supportive. And we need to then invest up front in getting people back into work for those who can work. That costs money, so we need to do all of that first before we start saying, we're going to change the way in which PIP is assessed, or we're going to freeze universal credit. We need to push all that way down the line and do these other things first to see if we can really make it work before we start looking at punitive actions like cuts.
Have you seen the longer list? The rumoured 170?
I haven't seen the names on that list, no.
But do you get a feeling that perhaps more quote-unquote moderate MPs are getting on board with objecting to this?
Absolutely. If you were to say to me, is there a general unease and unhappiness within the Labour Party in Parliament at these proposals, the answer is an overwhelming yes. Absolutely. If you ask me to put numbers on that, it becomes a bit more difficult, but at least 100 to 150 would feel very unhappy about some of this stuff. that doesn't necessarily read across that 150 people are going to vote against the government.
Yeah.
That would be a foolish mistake to make. So the numbers of people who've declared that they're not going to vote for this is somewhere more in a sort of 40 to 50 number. And then the other 100, I think, are floating in that sense, that they're to be persuaded, perhaps. Government might try and convince them that it's not as bad as people have told them. There may be a concession coming down the line. Who knows? And all of this might change the numbers. But at the moment, as it stands, at least a quarter of the Parliamentary Labour Party, in my view, are unhappy with what's being suggested.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it has changed. It certainly, there was a feeling, I think, last July, definitely sort of around October time, that there was a real strength of feeling behind Starmer and that people weren't going to vote against certain measures. But that's waning, is it, in your opinion? Do you think that perhaps some of that 2024 intake are now feeling a little bit bolder than they first did?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, just looking at it from a very sort of personal and practical point of view, 3 weeks into being a new MP, the Chancellor announced she was going to means test the winter fuel allowance. That was not something I could support. From all the work I'd done previously, I'd written extensively about universalism and so on. There was no way I was going to be able to undo that and go through the yes lobby. But because I was a new MP and honestly didn't really know a lot about how all this worked, I abstained. So I didn't vote against the government, but I didn't vote for it either. If you were to have that same vote now, I'd definitely vote against the government. Now, I'm just giving you my personal journey in the last 10 months. That's probably similar for other MPs as well. So people who voted for the winter fuel cut back in, August, September, and I know a number of them, now feel deeply unhappy about that and regret doing that. But it was a moment in time. They were new, they were persuaded. Now I think they'd be less persuaded. They know more. Perhaps they're a bit more confident. So I think it would be different if we were to have that vote again. I'm not saying we are going to, but I'm just giving you an example, I think, if we were to do that. So yeah, people are shifting all the time. Last week, really good case in point. A few months ago, I raised a question with David Lammy, the Secretary of State, Foreign Secretary, about Gaza. I called for sanctions, I called for recognition of the Palestinian state, and I called for an end to arms sales. Sunk without a trace, largely. Last week, there were MPs who wouldn't have even gone anywhere near that argument 3 months earlier, all standing up saying exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. So there's been a shift, not because of me, because of circumstances. People keep seeing what's going on. People keep reading about what's happening. People are being lobbied by their constituents. Their minds are being changed. So when they felt comfortable 3 or 4 months ago, they feel less comfortable now about these issues, and they're beginning to speak out about it. I welcome that. I mean, I think that's a positive move, that people are getting more confident, that people are more articulate in their arguments, that people understand the arguments more, and people feel the ability and need to speak out. I think that's positive.
I appreciate the nuance of that answer, but do you think you could sympathise with perhaps why some people would be infuriated hearing that perhaps it took their representative a bit longer to speak with conscience?
Well, I think you've got to cut a bit of slack, actually. I mean, it's not an easy job. And the public, and I didn't realise either, so why should the public realise? I was involved in politics, trade unionism, the labour movement for decades, and I didn't really understand what MPs did or what the pressures were on their lives. So you have to be a bit more sort of, not sympathetic to people who you think have made the wrong decision, but you have to be sympathetic to the circumstances in which they find themselves. And people are on their own journeys, aren't they, from where they are to where they might end up as parliamentarians. We were all a brand new bunch. Over half of all the MPs were absolutely brand new in July. Well, we're all going to find our feet in different ways. For months, I didn't even have an office. I'm working in the corridor. I mean, come on. And you're getting tons and tons of email come through from constituents I don't have any staff. I don't have an office.
It's like you're subcontracted to the NHS or something here,
So,
working in a corridor.
You know, and yet you're expected to respond straight away to email. I've got no staff to do that. I've got no one to do that. I haven't got an office to do that in. So there's no understanding of that. So when I say cutting some slack to politicians, I don't mean in a sort of political sense. I mean in a human sense. You just have to understand how this works, you know?
Yeah.
And we just need to say, yeah, okay, he didn't answer my email straight away. Maybe he's got another email that he had to answer first. You know, there has to be a bit of understanding about some of that. And the fact that people didn't speak out in the past on things and now they might be, they're going on that journey too, aren't they? I might be at a different place to them, other people be a different place to me, but everybody's going on it.